All right, diving into this deep dive on nature versus nurture. You sent some pretty fascinating research, especially on those early childhood years. Really seems like we're going to uncover how much of those years are shaped by genetics versus, well, everything else going on.
Yeah, fascinating area. It's like we've been trying to figure out these two powerful forces forever. And what's interesting is it's not just nature plus nurture equals, outcome.
Mhm.
It's more of a like an actual interplay between them.
So, if we think of nature as the base, the foundation, the genes from our parents, that's what sets up our looks, tendencies, maybe even those little quirky things that make us us, right?
And those predispositions, they can be pretty strong. This blog post had a study on identical twins, and it's pretty wild. They were raised in totally different environments, and they often end up with really similar behaviors, like preferences, even jobs they pick.
So even when you try to account for upbringing and all those different experiences, there's still this pull from our DNA. It's like our genes are whispering possibilities to us.
Exactly. And research shows it goes way beyond just the physical stuff. It's in how we think, how we process language, even our emotions. Like a child who might be genetically predisposed to music. They might just find themselves drawn to instruments, melodies at a really young age.
Makes you think of those kids we call natural athletes or have a gift for math, almost like it's, encoded somehow.
Yeah.
But this blog post, it seems to say that nurture, that's the environment, the experiences, that's where it gets interesting, right?
Absolutely. Nurtures the sculptor. It takes those predispositions and shapes them, molds them. And early childhood, it's not just like a loving home, it's the whole picture. Good food, safe place, exposure to language, chances to learn.
It's bigger than just immediate family then. It's like the whole context they're growing up in. Makes you wonder how much those bigger societal things affect how those genetic things actually play out.
Exactly. This blog post goes into some research on early intervention programs for kids facing, tougher socioeconomic situations. Found that if you give them high quality early childhood education, plus make sure they have stable housing, good food, that could seriously impact their development,
Hmm.
even when you account for potential like genetic disadvantages.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. It's like creating an environment where they can truly, thrive despite any challenges that might be like purely genetic. Really shows how nurture can be a counterbalance sometimes.
Exactly. And it really shows how we need to look at these two forces, how they interact. It's complex. The blog uses this idea of flexibility, how nurture can kind of adapt in ways that our genes, our set blueprint can't.
Could you give an example of how that might look in, a child's life?
Imagine a child, and they're genetically predisposed to be athletic. Their genes might be all about strength, speed, coordination. But if they can't access, sports programs, good nutrition, or even just encouragement from adults, that potential might never really come out.
So even with all the natural talent, if they don't have the right opportunities, the support, it just kind of stays dormant.
Right, like having this amazing sound system, but no music to play on it. Nurture is that music, the experiences, the guidance that lets those talents, shine.
That's a really powerful way to put it. It's like nature might say what's possible, but nurture decides if it actually happens.
And this blog, it really pushes that point, especially about early childhood education. It argues that if you give kids enriching the learning environments, especially when they're young, where they can explore, develop skills, that's key to helping them reach their full potential.
So if those early years are so key to shaping how nature and nurture kind of worked together, how can parents, caregivers, how do they navigate all this? Is it about finding a child's strengths and weaknesses, then building this perfect environment?
It's definitely not about being perfect, but it's about understanding that every child is this unique mix of nature and nurture. And knowing we have this power to create environments that are supportive, stimulating, where they can truly thrive.
And this blog post seems to say that it's not just about fixing problems or challenges, it's about seeing and nurturing those natural strengths too.
For sure. It's about nurturing those talents, passions, the things that really light a child up.
This is all really interesting, but it definitely brings up more questions than answers. And I'm especially curious about those times when a child's natural tendencies might clash with their environment.
That's a great point. It's one of the most complex parts of this whole discussion. When a kid's natural tendencies kind of clash with their environment, it's almost like two different scripts running at the same time. You've got that inborn script from, their genes, and then there's a script that the family, the culture, all the expectations around them are pushing.
Using the word script is interesting because it makes me think about how those early influences really do shape a kid's whole story. Like, what happens when those scripts are telling different stories?
Yeah, and that's where it gets even more fascinating, this whole nature-nurture thing. Sometimes those passions a child has, the things that just light them up, that they're so strong they survive, even if the environment isn't really on board.
This blog post talks about epigenetics, which I thought was really cool. It's like our genes aren't this fixed blueprint. They're more like this dynamic system that the environment can actually influence.
Yeah, exactly. Epigenetics is showing us how things in the environment can actually change how genes express themselves,
Yeah.
turning some on, turning some off. It's kind of a new area of study, but it adds a whole new layer to this nature-nurture conversation.
So it's not just that nurture shapes how genes work, but it can actually change the genes themselves. That's like, whoa.
It really is. Like
Right.
our experiences, especially when we're little, can have effects that last like way into our biology. There
Yeah.
was this study the blog talked about. It found that kids who went through trauma or neglect early on, their genes actually changed in ways that made them more likely to have mental health problems later.
Wow, that's a lot to think about. Makes you realize how important it is to create environments that are good for kids, not just as parents, but as a whole society, right?
Absolutely. But the cool thing is, epigenetics goes both ways. It's not just about preventing bad stuff. It's also saying that good things, like loving caregivers, chances to learn and grow, being part of a supportive community, all that can have a positive effect on how our genes work, making us more resilient.
So it's not just damage control, it's actively building something good. The blog mentioned a study on early music education and how it affects the brain. What do you think of that?
Oh, that study was so interesting because it shows that something that we might think of as like extra, like music, can have a huge impact on how kids' brains develop. They found that kids who were exposed to music early on, there was more activity in parts of their brains dealing with language, memory, even spatial reasoning.
It's like music is like fertilizer for their growing brains, helping those connections and pathways flourish.
That's such a good way to put it. It shows how all these different areas of development are linked. It's not just about focusing on like academics or sports. It's about creating an environment where a child can just thrive as a whole person.
So, thinking back to those clashing scripts we were talking about, how can parents and caregivers find that sweet spot between respecting what a child naturally leans towards and giving them the guidance they need?
I think a big part of it is realizing our job isn't to tell them what path to take, but to help them find their own, to create a space where they feel safe to try things out, explore, even mess up sometimes.
The blog really highlighted open communication, actually listening to what kids have to say, making it a conversation where they feel like they can share their dreams and hopes without feeling judged or like they have to fit a mold.
Exactly. It's about valuing who they are as individuals, even if their path looks different from what we might have imagined for them.
But there are definitely times when parents have to step in, right? Like, what about those times when a kid's interests might lead them down a path that's not good for them or might not set them up for success later?
That's a tough one. There's no easy answer. It's a balancing act between respecting their choices and giving them the support to make choices that are good for them.
It's like providing a safety net but not clipping their wings.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that's where understanding nature and nurture is so important. We can't change a child's genes, but we can create an environment that either helps or hinders their potential.
And the blog really pushes for quality early childhood education as one of the biggest things we can do.
Absolutely. Early childhood education can be a game changer, especially for kids who might be facing tougher circumstances. It's about giving everyone a fair chance, making sure every child, no matter the background, has the chance to thrive.
It's like giving each child the tools to write their own story, a
Yeah.
story that's unique and fulfilling.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And this blog, it reminds us that understanding nature and nurture isn't just like an academic thing. It's about creating a world where every child has a chance to shine.
This deep dive has been really eye-opening. I'm left with this feeling of awe, but also responsibility. We've covered a lot, but there's one thing I'm still wondering about.
What's that?
What if a child's environment just doesn't match their natural inclinations? Like, what if they're born with a passion for art, but their family is all about sports? How does that play out over time?
That's a question that gets to the core of this whole debate, nature versus nurture. It's a question that deserves more exploration, for sure.
We're back and still thinking about those times when a child's environment just doesn't quite match their natural inclinations. Like, can a seed still grow if it's planted in the wrong kind of soil?
Yeah, researchers, philosophers, they've been wrestling with that question forever. What happens when those talents, passions, the stuff we've been talking about, clash with what society or family expects?
This blog post had this story about a young woman. She was amazing at math and science growing up, even won like national awards. But she secretly loved creative writing.
It's a great example of how those inner drives can still be there even when you feel pressure to go a different way. She ended up having a successful career as an engineer, but she kept writing on the side, and eventually she published a novel, got rave reviews.
It's almost like her scientific side and her creative side were like intertwined, each one making the other stronger. But I guess sometimes those passions just fade away, right? If the environment isn't supportive.
Unfortunately, yeah, that happens. Some people end up going along with those external pressures, doing well in areas that don't really light them up inside. They might be successful, even happy, but there's always that question. What if they had been able to, really nurture those talents they were born with?
It makes you wonder how much potential is out there, just waiting to be unlocked, but the environment never gave it the chance.
It's a tough thought. It really shows how important it is to create a culture where kids feel okay to explore, to be themselves, to chase their passions, even if those passions are different from the norm or what their family wants.
The blog post talked about this idea of autonomy supportive parenting. That's where parents give guidance, set boundaries, but also really encourage a child's independence, let them make choices that feel right for them.
That seems like a good way to find that balance, right, between safety and freedom. Recognizing that our job as parents, caregivers, isn't to control their every move, but to help them find their own way.
It sounds like it takes a lot of trust, not just in the child, but in the whole process of exploring and figuring things out.
It does. And it means letting go of the need to control the outcome. As parents, it's easy to fall into the trap of wanting our kids to be just like us, or pushing them toward what we think is safe or successful. But in the end, it's about recognizing that their journey is theirs.
And that their own unique mix of nature and nurture will guide them in ways we can't always, predict or even fully understand.
Exactly. It's about fostering their curiosity, that love of learning, that willingness to try things and maybe fail sometimes, and creating a space where mistakes are seen as part of the process, not the end of the world.
This deep dive has really changed how I think about nature versus nurture. It's not about picking sides or saying which one is more important. It's about seeing how these two forces work together in all their complexity.
It's about understanding that every single person is this unique creation, shaped by their genes and by everything they experience in life. And it's about building a world where every child has the chance to find their own spark.
So as we wrap up, I want to leave you with this. Knowing how crucial both nature and nurture are to who we become, what kind of environment do you think really helps a child grow and thrive? It's something to think about. It reminds us of the power we have to make a difference in children's lives. By understanding this amazing interplay, we can create a world where every child has the chance to reach their full potential, to share their unique gifts. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep.